There is a village in Thailand where people fear not the darkness, but the light. Because under lamplight, some shadows arrive late. Some never arrive at all. This is not a story about death. It is a story about what remains when a shadow is taken and never returned. Listen carefully. And before the night ends, take a look at the ground beneath your feet. Chapter 1. The village no one walks through after sunset. The dirt road leading into Ban Nong Sang was so narrow that 2 motorbike wheels had to carefully slide past one another. On both sides stood bamboo groves and ancient sacred trees, their canopies weaving together like a low ceiling, tearing the late afternoon sunlight into scattered patches of light and shadow across the road. I slowed down as the clock neared 6 o'clock in the evening, the moment the Thais call the hour of crossing. When day has not fully died, and night has not yet truly been born. There was no village sign, only a leaning, rotting wooden post with a faded yellow cloth tied around it, fluttering weakly in the breeze. As my wheels crossed that invisible boundary, a strange sensation washed over me, as if I had entered a place no longer governed by ordinary time. The village was unnervingly quiet. Wooden stilt houses stood close together, their doors shut tight even though daylight remained. No dogs barked, no children laughed. No smell of cooking fires drifted through the air. Only the wind slipped beneath the houses, producing dry, rhythmic sounds, like the breathing of something asleep, but never truly at rest. I stopped in front of my mother's house. When my foot touched the ground, I instinctively looked down at my shadow stretched across the red earth. It was there, long, warped by the slanting sun, but something made me freeze. It did not move at the same time as I did. When I shifted my weight, the shadow followed a half-beat later, as if it needed time to decide whether to imitate me. Just tired, I told myself, but a cold sensation crept slowly from my spine up to the back of my neck. The door opened quietly. My mother stood there, thinner than I remembered, her eyes sunken. She glanced at me briefly, then looked down at the ground instead. Only after confirming something did she release a long breath. "You came back late," she said softly. "Before it gets completely dark." I tried to smile, to lighten the moment, but the smile froze on my lips when I noticed her hands were trembling. Not from joy, but from fear. "Is something wrong in the village?" I asked. She didn't answer. She gently pulled me inside and closed the door, bolting it carefully, as if something outside might be watching. When the light inside settled, she finally looked at my face, properly, for the first time. "At night," she whispered, "don't go outside, and never look at your shadow under lamplight." Before I could ask anything more, the remaining twilight outside vanished unnaturally fast. It was as if an invisible hand had yanked the curtain of night down over the entire village. Through the gaps in the floorboards, I saw oil lamps being lit one by one, their yellow flames weak and unsteady. I crouched slightly and looked through the crack beneath the door. Under those trembling lights, my shadow appeared again on the ground. But this time, it did not move at all. And I was still breathing. In that moment, I finally understood why Ban Nong Sang was a village where no one walked after sunset. It wasn't because darkness itself was dangerous. It was because there are things that appear only when a person's shadow no longer truly belongs to them. Chapter 2. The Woman Under the Lamppost. Night did not fall gently over Ban Nong Sang. It collapsed onto the village like a black cloth violently torn from the sky. Within minutes, every familiar sound disappeared, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence, so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my chest. My mother went to sleep early. Not the sleep of exhaustion, but the kind of forced sleep that comes from believing that closing one's eyes might temporarily erase what exists outside. I lay on the wooden floor, listening to insects churring unevenly, mixed with the wind slipping through the gaps in the boards. Every sound made my body tense. Close to midnight, I heard footsteps. They were not normal footsteps. They were slow, measured, and unnaturally light, like someone afraid of hurting the ground beneath their feet. The sound came from the far end of the road, where an old oil lamp stood. When I was a child, that spot had been where children gathered every evening. I sat up, my heart pounding. Reason told me to stay inside. But something, half curiosity, half compulsion, pulled me toward the door. I opened it just enough to look outside. Under the dim yellow glow of the oil lamp stood a woman. She wore an old traditional Thai dress, dark in color, soaked as if she had stepped out of a pond or from a rain that had ended long ago. Her hair hung loose, covering most of her face. She stood perfectly still, the only movement being the hem of her dress swaying faintly in the breeze. What made my throat tighten was this. The ground beneath her feet was completely empty. The lamp shone directly downward, unobstructed. The lamppost cast a long shadow. The fence beside the road cast its own crooked shadow. But the woman did not. I rubbed my eyes. Looked again. There was no shadow. A cold surge ran up my spine, raising goosebumps along my skin. In my head, my mother's warning from earlier echoed clearly. Never look at your shadow under lamplight. The woman moved. She turned her head very slowly, as if each joint in her neck creaked in the silent night. I could not see her face clearly, only her eyes, too deep. Dark hollows reflecting the lamplight with a glow that did not belong to the living. She was looking directly at me. I was certain I had made no sound. Yet she knew I was there. "You've come back," she said. Her voice was hoarse and low, like a throat long unused for speaking to the living. I did not answer. My entire body had gone rigid. She took one step forward, then another. Each step touched the ground without a sound, and even as she moved, no shadow appeared beneath her feet. It was as if the light itself refused to acknowledge her. "Don't look down," she whispered. "At night, shadows don't behave as they do in the daytime." Instinctively, my eyes dropped. At that exact moment, my blood seemed to freeze. My shadow was no longer aligned with my body. It did not stand directly beneath me. It was slightly off to the side, as if it no longer fully belonged to me. When I looked up again, the woman was gone. The lamp was still burning. The road was empty. But the sensation of being watched remained, lurking within the darkness. I slammed the door shut and leaned against the wall, gasping as if I had just escaped something that should not exist. My hands trembled as I looked down at the floor. My shadow was still there. But now, it was no longer completely still. It quivered, like a living thing that had just awakened. And in that moment, I understood that from the instant the shadowless woman had seen me. What followed me was no longer just fear. Chapter 3. The Whispers of Phi Mai and Ngao. I woke the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, as if I had just come out of a long fever. Sunlight slipped through the gaps in the wooden floorboards, cutting the room into sharp blocks of light and shadow. Yet it brought me no comfort. The first thing I did, almost instinctively, was look down. My shadow was still there. It lay directly beneath my feet, clear and intact, too normal. That sense of normality unsettled me, as if the night before had been nothing more than an overactive imagination. I told myself the woman under the lamp had been a trick of the light, a wandering villager distorted by darkness. But when I stepped outside, I realized there were things in this village that could not be explained by reason. People moved sparingly, and when they did, they hurried through sunlit spaces with their heads lowered, as if afraid the light might reveal something that should remain unseen. No one gathered to talk, no laughter, only brief, cautious glances and greetings so clipped they felt cold. I spoke to an old man mending fishing nets by the pond behind the temple. He stared at me for a long moment before asking a question that seemed unrelated. "Did you go outside last night?" I shook my head, though the lie felt thin. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes flicking briefly toward my feet before turning away. "That's good," he said. "If you've already seen it, then it's no longer good." I asked him what it was. He fell silent for a long time, his hands continuing to work the net as if the repetitive motion helped him avoid thinking. Finally, he gestured for me to sit lower and dropped his voice until it nearly blended with the wind. "In this village," he said, "we call it Phi Mai and Ngao." The name sounded dry and sharp, like old bones scraping together. "The Shadowless Ghost," he explained, "not a vengeful spirit, not a wandering soul, but a person who died while their shadow was taken." I asked how a shadow could be taken at all. The old man looked up. and for the first time his clouded eyes turned sharp. "A shadow clings to the ground," he said. "It ties a person to the place they belong. Once you lose it, you no longer know where you belong." According to him, Phi Mai and Ngao did not attack people the way ghosts did in children's stories. It did not crave blood. It only needed shadows. When it stared at someone long enough, that person's shadow would begin to drift away, slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first it shifted just a little. Then it faded, and one day, it disappeared. "People without shadows," he continued, "don't die right away. They still walk, still talk, still smile, but their eyes are empty. And they never dare stand in sunlight for long." I thought of the villagers I had seen that morning, pale faces, hurried steps, shadows that were either too faint or nearly absent. "So how do you avoid it?" I asked. The old man did not answer immediately. He tied the final knot in his net and stood up. "No one avoids it once it chooses," he said. "All you can do is delay it." Before leaving, he turned back to me one last time. "At night," he warned, "don't let the lamplight fall straight at your feet. And if one day you notice your shadow no longer obeys you, don't ask why." I sat alone by the pond, watching the still surface reflect the blue sky. My reflection was clear in the water. But when a cloud passed over the sun, I saw, in a brief, chilling moment, the reflection lagged behind me by a single beat. And this time, I knew for certain. The night before had not been a dream. Chapter 4. The child Who cast no reflection in the water. The pond behind Ban Nong Sang Temple was never deep. As a child, I had swum there countless times, familiar with the smell of mud and the soft weeds curling around my ankles. The villagers always said the pond was gentle. It had never taken a life. That was why, when a scream tore through the air behind the temple that afternoon, no one believed the worst had happened. I ran with the others. The sun stood directly overhead, pouring light onto the pond until its surface glittered like a wide mirror. And at the center of that mirror floated something, small, face down, dark clothes puffed by water. A child. No one stepped in right away. The villagers formed a loose circle along the bank, whispering, pointing, but keeping their distance. It wasn't the fear of a corpse that stopped them. It was how unnaturally still the water was. A young monk, trembling, approached with a bamboo pole and gently nudged the body. The child rolled slightly, revealing a pale face, eyes half open and clouded, as if still staring at something beneath the surface. "That's strange," someone murmured. I bent down instinctively, and in that instant, my heart seemed to drop straight into my stomach. On the surface of the pond, there was no reflection of the child. The shadows of the villagers stretched across the water. The shadow of the old Bodhi tree trembled with the breeze. But directly beneath the child's body, the water was empty. An old woman covered her mouth and staggered back. "He didn't drown," she whispered. "His shadow was taken before he entered the water." The words spread like a cold wind. The crowd immediately pulled back from the pond, as if the danger was not in the water, but standing among them. The abbot arrived quickly, his expression heavy. He ordered no one to touch the body again. He stood still, hands clasped, murmuring prayers, his eyes never leaving the pond. "Bring a lamp here," he said. An oil lamp was lit, despite it being midday. The trembling light shone down onto the water, and what I saw made my legs weaken. Not only was there no shadow, the child did not reflect in the water at all, as if the body no longer belonged to this world, even though it was still there. The child's mother arrived last. She ran to the edge of the pond, crying out, but when she looked down, her voice died in her throat. She stared at the empty space where her child's image should have been, then slowly stepped back, as if she had realized something far worse than death. That night, there was no temple bell, no public funeral rites. The child's body was taken away quietly before sunset. I returned home with a crushing weight in my chest. In my room, sunlight filtered through the window and spilled across the floor. I stood very still, afraid to move. Then I looked down. My shadow was still there, but at its edges, it had faded slightly, as if someone had just touched it, and had not yet finished taking it. That night, when the village lights went out, I heard the sound of water stirring behind the temple. Not the sound of someone falling in, but the sound of something stepping out of the pond. Chapter 5. The mother WHO locked the door from the inside. The child's mother did not appear for the entire following day. Her stilt house stood at the far edge of the village, pressed against the forest, where sunlight only reached briefly in the early morning before being swallowed by the trees. No one dared approach it. The villagers believed that houses touched by death were not yet clean, especially when the death was incomplete. By late afternoon, a strange smell began to drift through the air. It was not exactly the smell of a corpse, but something damp and stale, faintly metallic, like pond water left standing too long under weak sunlight. Neighbors stood at a distance, covering their noses, calling out, but there was no answer. The door was locked from the inside. The windows were shut tight. A young monk and 2 men from the village were called. They stood before the door for a long time, as if each feared being the first to touch it. Finally, they forced it open. The sound of splintering wood echoed sharply. Inside, it was darker than I expected. Curtains were drawn tight, leaving only a thin strip of light that revealed the woman lying in the center of the floor. She lay on her side, arms curled against her chest, mouth open as if she had been trying to scream but never finished. Her eyes were wide open, staring fixedly at the corner of the room. That corner held nothing. No altar, no furniture, no shadow. Yet everyone there could feel it. Something had stood in that spot for a long time. One man swallowed hard and whispered. The door was locked from the inside. The young monk said nothing. He knelt down and brought an oil lamp closer. The trembling light swept across the floor, along the wooden walls, then stopped near the woman's feet. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then someone let out a quiet, hissing breath. On the floor were 2 sets of footprints. One was clear, the woman's own. The other was faint, barely impressed into the wood. And there was only one shadow. That shadow stretched toward the empty corner of the room, twisted and misshapen, belonging to no visible body. It did not resemble a human shadow, nor the shadow of an object. It looked more like the residue of something that had just left. The woman's body was carried out before sunset. There were no loud cries. No one dared touch her for long. She died in silence, and that silence settled over the entire village. That night, I could not sleep. I lit a small lamp in my room, placing it close to the wall to avoid the light falling directly onto the floor. But no matter how careful I was, something felt wrong, not in the room, but inside my own body. I stood up and took 1 step. My shadow followed. I took another step. The shadow followed again, but slower. I stopped completely. My shadow continued moving for a moment, then froze, as if it had gone a little too far and only just realized it. My throat went dry. I wanted to call for my mother, but no sound came out. In the darkest corner of the room, something shifted. No clear shape, no clear outline, just a patch of darkness denser than the rest, as if light could not touch it. I heard a very soft breath. It was not mine. And in that moment, I understood why the woman had died with her eyes wide open. She had not died of fear. She had died because she had seen something without a shadow, taking the last piece of what remained of her. Chapter 6. When the shadow begins to walk ahead. After the mother's death, I became more afraid of light than of darkness. During the day, sunlight still fell over the village as usual, but it felt harsh and intrusive, as if it were trying to expose something I was not ready to face. I avoided standing in the sun for too long. I avoided looking at the ground. I even avoided puddles where my reflection might appear. But no matter how much I tried to avoid it, there were things that could not be avoided forever. That afternoon, I went behind the house to fetch water. The sun was already slanting low, its light cutting through the bamboo and casting long, crooked streaks across the ground. I bent down to scoop the water, then straightened up. And I realized my shadow was already there, waiting. It did not appear with me. It was already standing on the ground, as if it had arrived before I did. I froze. My heart hammered so loudly my ears rang. The shadow remained perfectly still, like an old mark burned into the earth. I raised my hand, very slowly. The shadow raised its hand before I did. Just a fraction of a second earlier. But enough to make sweat break out across my back. I tilted my head. The shadow tilted first. I stepped backward. The shadow did not retreat right away, it lingered, as if deciding whether it should follow. In that moment, I felt something shift. I was no longer the one leading. I was the one following. That night, I tried to talk to my mother about what was happening in the village. She was silent for a long time, her fingers moving over her old prayer beads until her knuckles turned white. "Don't pay attention to it anymore," she said. "Some things, once you see them clearly, you can't turn back from." I wanted to ask her about the woman under the lamp, about Phi Mai and Ngao, about the villagers who no longer had shadows. But when I looked into my mother's eyes, I realized she already knew the ending of those questions. Night fell. I lay on the wooden floor, staring up at the ceiling. The weak glow of the oil lamp cast the shadows of roof beams overhead, overlapping like invisible cages. I shifted my body slightly. The shadow on the wall shifted too. But when I stopped, it kept moving. The shadow stretched farther, thinning, as if it no longer fit inside my body. I held my breath, my heart racing. The sensation was like watching myself slip out of my own skin, not of flesh, but of something more essential. I heard footsteps inside the house. Very soft. Very close. There was no creaking floorboard. No heavy breathing. Just a steady rhythm, like someone who knew this house far too well. I wanted to turn around, but my neck stiffened, as if held in place. The shadow on the wall stopped. Then it peeled away from me. Not completely, just its outer edge, thin as mist, shuddered and slid down the wall, pooling across the floor. It had no clear shape, only a moving darkness, but I knew with certainty. It was my shadow. A voice spoke directly behind me, low and hoarse, terrifyingly familiar. "Don't be afraid. It's just time." I did not turn around. I did not move. I barely breathed. Because I understood then. When a shadow begins to walk ahead, the body becomes nothing more than the thing that follows. And sooner or later, it will be left behind. Chapter 7. The old mirror in the Stilt house. The mirror hung in the innermost room of the Stilt house, where daylight rarely reached. I had known of its existence since childhood, yet I had never been allowed to approach it. It was always covered with a dark red cloth, the color of dried blood, tied tightly with an old rope. My grandmother used to say it was not a mirror for looking at one's face, but a mirror meant to keep things from escaping. That night, after my shadow began to walk ahead of me, sleep became impossible. One thought remained in my mind: if a shadow could separate from its owner, then a mirror, something that reflects everything, would show the truth no one in the village dared to speak. I lit an oil lamp and walked slowly into the inner room. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my feet, as if warning me to turn back. The red cloth swallowed the lamplight, making the space around it feel unnaturally dim. I reached out. The moment my fingers touched the cloth, I felt cold, not the chill of night air, but the kind of cold that belonged to objects that had long ceased to be part of the living world. I pulled. The cloth fell away. The mirror was old and scarred, its surface scratched and dull, its wooden frame cracked and decaying, as if it had witnessed too much to ever forget. I raised the lamp higher. The light struck the glass, and I saw myself. The reflection was clear. My face was pale. Dark circles ringed my eyes from sleepless nights. Everything was correct, except for one thing. In the mirror, I stood half a step farther back than where I actually was. Outside the mirror, I was standing still, but inside it, I looked as if I were being pulled backward, as though someone were gripping my shoulders from behind. I did not dare turn around. Instinctively, I lowered my eyes to the floor. Beneath my feet, there was no shadow. But inside the mirror, a faint, trembling shadow clung to the reflection of my feet. It did not fall onto the ground. It seemed fused to the glass itself, shivering like a trapped living thing. Then I noticed another movement. Behind my reflection in the mirror stood a woman, extremely close. She wore a dark traditional Thai dress. Her hair hung loose and wet. Her face was pale, her eyes deep and hollow as she stared directly at me through the glass, not with rage, but with something far more unsettling: expectation. She placed her hand on the shoulder of my reflection. At once, an invisible weight pressed down on my own shoulder. Even though nothing touched me in reality, I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. Her lips moved. Just a little longer, she said. Your shadow is already used to me. I stepped backward. The reflection did not. Instead, it moved closer to the surface of the mirror, as if trying to step out. The faint shadow beneath it convulsed, stretching upward, wrapping around the reflected body. Startled, I dropped the oil lamp. The flame went out instantly, plunging the room into complete darkness. In that darkness, I heard a whisper right beside my ear, not from the mirror, but from inside myself. Don't look anymore, the hoarse voice said. A person without a shadow should not see themselves. When I relit the lamp, the mirror was black. It reflected nothing at all, as if it had swallowed a part of me. And from that moment on, I knew I was no longer the only one living inside this body. Chapter 8. Memories that do not belong to me. After the night with the mirror, I began to dream dreams that were not mine. At first, they came as fragments. A red dirt road I did not recognize. A stilt house lower than the one in my memory. The thick smell of incense mixed with the cold stench of pond mud. I would wake in the middle of the night, my heart racing, unable to remember exactly what I had seen. Only that the grief lingering in my chest felt far too real. As if someone had just finished crying inside me. Then the dreams began to form continuous scenes. I saw myself, or something wearing my shape, standing in the temple courtyard many years ago. The villagers knelt in a wide circle. The sound of chanting was slow and heavy, not meant to release a soul, but to bind it. At the center stood a young woman, her hands tied, her clothes soaked, her head was bowed, her hair covering her face. Yet I knew without doubt, she was the woman from beneath the lamp. I jolted awake, cold sweat soaking through my shirt. I had never witnessed such a scene. I had never even heard it described in detail. And yet, I remembered. In daylight, the memories did not fade. They clung to me like a second skin. When I walked past the temple yard, I knew exactly which brick had cracked during the ritual years ago. When I passed the pond, I heard water stirring, though the surface was still. I knew where the woman had been forced to kneel, and where she had lifted her head for the last time. What terrified me most was this. I remembered not just the images, but the emotions. I remembered the fear tightening around my throat. I remembered the betrayal by familiar faces. I remembered the moment of realization that the ritual was never meant to save anyone, only to exchange something. One afternoon, my mother asked, "Are you all right? You seem different lately." I meant to say that I was fine, but the words that left my mouth were not the ones I intended, spoken in a voice that was not entirely my own. Back then, I was terrified too. My mother froze. The prayer beads slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. "What did you say?" she whispered. I didn't know why I had said it, but in that moment, an image surfaced clearly in my mind. The young woman turning her head, looking toward this very house, her eyes filled with both hatred and pleading. That night, I looked at my reflection in a basin of water by the porch. The face staring back was mine, but the eyes were no longer entirely so. Something deeper looked out from within them, something older, as if it had lived far too long in darkness. I raised my hand and touched the surface of the water. The reflection moved first, and then, very softly, a thought that was not mine echoed inside my head. "Don't worry, I'm only remembering." I stumbled back, gasping, yet no matter how far I retreated, I felt someone standing directly behind me, needing no shadow, no shape, only an empty space inside me to remain. That was when I understood the truth no one in the village dared to speak. Phi Maya in Ngao does not only take shadows, it leaves its memories behind. And when those memories grow heavy enough, the living can no longer tell what belongs to them, and what belongs to something that died but never truly left. Chapter 9. When the shadow gains weight. I realized the shadow had changed on an ordinary morning. My mother was sweeping the yard. The dry scrape of the bamboo broom against the ground sounded steady and familiar. I stood on the front steps, watching sunlight spill across the packed earth. trying to convince myself that daylight still kept everything under control. Then my mother stopped. The broom would not pass through. It was as if something invisible was blocking its way. She frowned and pushed harder. This time the broom slid aside, leaving behind a strange curved mark in the dirt. I looked down instinctively, and a chill tightened around my chest. There was a shallow depression in the ground. Not deep, but clear enough to show that something had been standing there. I stepped back. The depression did not disappear at once. It lingered for several seconds before slowly smoothing itself out, as if the earth were trying to forget a weight that should not exist. "Are you standing in the way?" my mother asked, though her voice lacked certainty. I shook my head. She stared at me for a long moment, her gaze fixed not on me, but on the empty space in front of me, as if she were carefully avoiding looking. From that day on, the signs multiplied. Doors closed by themselves when there was no wind. A woven mat sagged as if someone had sat down. Water rippled in a basin no one had touched. And every time, the same sensation followed. The shadow was nearby. That evening, I sat alone inside, trying to write down what was happening to keep my thoughts from unraveling. The oil lamp on the table flickered. I heard a very soft thud behind me, like the sound of a foot touching the floor. I did not turn around. Not out of courage, but because I knew I would see nothing. Instead, I looked down. My shadow stretched longer than it should have. Not only longer, but thicker. Its edges were no longer soft and blurred, but dark and sharply defined, as if drawn in solid ink. It pressed against the floor, making the wooden planks dip slightly with a faint creak. The shadow was heavy. I lifted my foot off the ground. The shadow did not lift with it. It stayed where it was, pressing down, as if it no longer needed me to exist. I felt a gentle tug at my ankle, not painful, just enough to unbalance me. A thought rose calmly in my mind, terrifying in its certainty. "Don't go yet, I'm not finished." I fell to the floor. In that instant, I felt something settle onto my back, not the weight of a human body, but a dense, formless mass of cold darkness. The floor groaned beneath it. I struggled to breathe, each breath short and shallow. And in my panic, I realized something far worse. The sensation of being pressed down felt familiar, not because it had happened to me before, but because I had pressed down on someone else in a memory that did not belong to me. I saw again the woman held to the ground during the ritual. I saw invisible hands, not human hands, but shadows, pinning her down, refusing to let her rise. Shadows had always had weight. They just hadn't been mine. When the pressure finally lifted, I lay still for a long time. The floor returned to normal. My shadow slipped back beneath my feet, obedient, as if it had never betrayed me. But I understood then. Once a shadow learns how to touch the world, it will no longer accept being only an image. And when that happens, the one who must leave will not be the shadow. Chapter 10. My mother was inside the shadow. I realized it on a morning that seemed completely ordinary. My mother was cooking rice in the kitchen. Sunlight slanted in through the window, spilling across the floor and stretching her shadow out behind her. I stood in the doorway, watching her from a distance, trying to convince myself that everything was still fine, that whatever was happening to me had not yet reached anyone else. Then my mother turned around. Her smile was the same. Her voice was still gentle and slow. But her shadow did not turn with her. It remained where it was, dark and unmoving on the floor, while my mother had already stepped aside. The moment was brief, so brief that anyone not staring directly at it might have dismissed it as a trick of the light. But I saw it clearly. My mother's shadow was even slower than mine. "What are you standing there for?" she asked, still stirring the rice. "Come eat before it gets cold." I didn't answer. My throat tightened. I stared at the ground, watching as her shadow began to shift on its own, not following her movements, but slowly adjusting itself, as if searching for a position that suited it better. "Didn't you sleep again last night?" she asked, concern slipping into her voice. I wanted to tell her everything, to scream that something was following me, that shadows were no longer just shadows. But when I looked at her face, I was afraid of what would happen if she believed me. At noon, My mother carried a woven mat outside to dry in the sun. I stood on the porch, watching every small movement. When she bent down, I saw the shadow behind her swell briefly, like cloth filling with wind from the inside. Then I heard a whisper. Not from my mother's mouth, but from beneath her feet. "She's tired. Let me stand in for her, just for a while." My head spun. A ringing filled my ears. My mother straightened and turned toward me, but for a fraction of a second. Her eyes were not entirely hers. They were deeper, still, like the eyes of the woman in the mirror. That night, I pretended to sleep. I watched through the crack in my mother's door, biting my lip to keep from crying out. My mother sat on her bed, her back to me. In front of her, her shadow sat facing her. Not a reflection. Not a trick of light. It was a solid, human-shaped darkness, sitting upright, not touching the bed. It had no clear features, only a dense blackness darker than the surrounding night, but I knew it was watching her. My mother spoke softly, as if soothing a child. "Just for a little while," she said. "Don't scare her." The shadow tilted its head. That simple gesture was too human. I covered my mouth as tears streamed down my face. I wanted to rush in, to pull my mother away, but some part of me understood, she knew, and she was willingly standing at the edge of the darkness, so I would not be taken completely. When morning came, my mother was already awake. She cooked, swept the yard, went about her routine as usual. There was nothing visibly wrong. Only one thing had changed. My mother's shadow was darker than before, and mine was noticeably thinner. The truth rose in my throat, choking me. Phi Maya Ngao did not need to hurry. It did not fight or force. It let the person I loved most grow accustomed to it first. And when the time came, it would not need to take me at all, because I would step willingly into the space my mother left behind. Chapter 11, The Replacement. The change did not happen in a single night. It unfolded quietly, little by little, the way darkness seeps into a room when someone forgets to light a lamp. At first, the signs were small, details so subtle that anyone who did not love deeply enough would never have noticed them. My mother began to forget her old habits. She placed bowls and chopsticks in the wrong spots. She cooked dishes I had always disliked, then looked surprised when I did not eat. Sometimes she stood for a long time in front of the household altar, staring at the incense bowl as if she could not remember why she was there. But what frightened me most was that she no longer held my gaze for long. Her eyes slid past me too quickly, as if avoiding something inside me. When sunlight fell across the floor, my mother's shadow appeared clearly, too clearly. Its edges were sharp and dark, no longer soft or natural. My own shadow, in contrast, faded and spread thinly, like ink soaking into water. One afternoon, I called for my mother from the yard. There was no answer. I stepped inside the house. She stood with her back to me, facing the old mirror in the inner room, the mirror that had long since been covered again with its red cloth. I heard no sound of her breathing. "Mom?" I called softly. She turned around. In that instant, my heart seemed to collapse. Her face was the same, but her smile came before her eyes did. It formed first, then her eyes followed, as if the two were no longer perfectly connected. "What are you calling for?" she asked calmly. I looked down at the floor without thinking. My mother's shadow was standing directly behind me. Not in the place a shadow should be. It stood upright, pressed close, like someone silently standing at my back, and my own shadow was a little farther away, distorted, as if it no longer knew where it belonged. That night, as I pretended to sleep, I heard whispers in the house. Not the voice of one person, but two voices overlapping, rising and falling, speaking in broken phrases. The girl, she's used to it now. Her shadow, it's very thin. I clenched my teeth, tears soaking into the mat beneath me. I did not dare open my eyes, because I knew, if I did, I would see something I was not yet ready to accept. The next morning, my mother woke me. She placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was very light, so light that it carried no warmth. "Get up," she said, "you should stay home today." I looked up. In the morning light, I saw it clearly. My mother's shadow no longer fully touched the ground. The heels of it had begun to fade, as if it were slowly detaching from the earth and fastening itself to something else, not the sunlight, not the floor, but me. Inside my head, a familiar voice spoke without lips or breath. I'm only borrowing her for a little while, just as you once borrowed me. At last, I understood the truth the village had buried for decades. Phi Maya and Ngao did not choose me. It did not choose my mother. The village chose. They had once used a single person to anchor a shadow for everyone else. Now the village had to give something back. And the replacement had begun long ago. Chapter 12. The Ritual and the Substitute. The abbot came to my house before dawn. He did not knock. He stood silently at the edge of the porch, hands pressed together, waiting until I stepped outside on my own. The moment I saw him, I knew there was nothing left to hide. You've seen it, he said. It was not a question. I nodded. My throat was too dry for words. The pale morning light fell across the yard, and in that light, the abbot's shadow lay exactly where it should, clear, whole, undisturbed. Only then did I understand why he was the only one in the village who had never been touched. We sat inside the old temple, closed for years. The smell of burned incense clung to the walls, the floor, the air itself. The abbot lit an oil lamp instead of candles and placed it between us. That ritual, he began, was never meant to call for rain. It was never meant to drive spirits away. It was meant to bind this village to the land. According to him, Ban Nong Sang had once been struck by drought and disease. People died so often that their shadows had no time to fade. The villagers believed the land had grown angry, and that it needed something human, yet not human, to anchor its spirit. That thing was a shadow. They chose a young woman with no family, someone whose shadow was heavy, a person deeply bound to the land, unlikely to leave. The ritual was performed in the temple courtyard at sunset, when day and night overlapped. They never intended to kill her, the abbot said. They only meant to take her shadow. But the ritual went wrong. The shadow was bound, but the soul was not released. The woman died, and her death was incomplete. The shadow did not return. The spirit could not move on. That was how Phi Maya Ngao was born. It doesn't kill out of hatred. The abbot continued. It exists because it has nowhere to stand. And this village has grown used to living on that absence. I asked why everything was collapsing only now. The old shadow has rotted, he replied, and because you came back. I understood. My shadow was like the woman's, heavy, anchored, easy to bind. There is only one way to end it, the abbot said. Someone must volunteer, not to die, but to stand still, to let the shadow remain, so others may move on. If I do this, I asked, what happens to my mother? The abbot lowered his head. The shadow will be returned to the dead, he said. Those who were borrowed from will be released. But you, he hesitated. You will live, for a very long time, but you will no longer belong to the light. That night, the village lit its lamps again. No one spoke to me, but the way they looked at me had changed. Relief, gratitude, and fear woven together. They already knew my choice, before I ever made it. Because in Ban Nong Sang, the one who returns last is always the one chosen to stay behind. Chapter 13. The Survivor. The ritual was performed at the thinnest boundary. Not at midnight, not at dawn, but at the brief moment when the sky shifted from gray to pale blue, when body and shadow overlapped most clearly. The temple courtyard was swept clean. There was no circle of kneeling villagers as there had been years ago. Only me, standing at the center, and an emptiness wide enough to feel cold. The abbot drew a circle of incense ash around me. He did not chant aloud. Every prayer was whispered, as if afraid of waking something that had grown accustomed to sleeping beneath the ground. Oil lamps were placed at the four directions, their weak light unable to drive the darkness away, only strong enough to pull the shadow out. I looked down. My shadow stretched long and dark. It trembled slightly, as if breathing. It felt like I was looking at another body, not of flesh and bone, but of memory, fear, and things buried too long. Do not move, the abbot said, no matter what you hear. And then I heard it. The sound of dripping water. Bare footsteps on damp earth. A very soft sigh, directly behind me. I did not need to turn around to know that Phi Mai and Ngao had arrived. It no longer held the clear shape of a woman. It was only a dense darkness standing at the edge of the light. Where my shadow was deepest. It did not rush. It did not threaten. It stood there, like something finally come to reclaim what had been taken for too long. A thought entered my mind, no longer confused, but terrifyingly clear. Just stand still. I obeyed. Cold spread from my feet up to my knees. I felt my shadow being pulled taut, like old cloth about to tear. Then came a gentle force, not painful, not violent, separating it from me. My knees gave way. Not from pain, but from suddenly becoming too light. I gasped. Air filled my lungs completely, strangely full, as if I had never breathed deeply before. When I lifted my head, my heart tightened at what I saw. My shadow was no longer beneath my feet. It stood inside the circle of ash, detached from me, thick and black. Phi Mai and Ngao merged into it, not consuming it, but fitting perfectly, like someone finally finding the seat meant for them. At that moment, the oil lamps went out all at once. When the light returned, the ash circle had cooled. The shadow remained, but I knew it no longer belonged to me. My mother ran to me and held me tightly. For the first time in days, I felt real warmth from her body. When I looked down, I saw her shadow had returned to normal, soft, faint, obedient. Mine had not. I stood beneath the morning light. There was no shadow. No one in the village dared look at my feet. They lowered their heads and stepped aside, making a path for me. In their eyes was the relief of those who survived, and the fear reserved for the one who had stayed behind in their place. I did not die. I still breathed. I still spoke. I still walked. But I knew with absolute certainty. The earth no longer held me. That night, as the sun set, I stood alone in the temple yard. Oil lamps were lit, shadows of trees, walls, and people appeared all around. Only I stood in the light, without leaving a trace. And at last, I understood what survivor truly meant in Ban Nong Sang. Not the one who remains alive after the ritual, but the one who is allowed to continue existing, without belonging to either side. Chapter 14. The Canal That Changed Color. The next morning, the canal that ran through Ban Nong Sang changed color. No one noticed at first. Only when the sun climbed higher did it become clear that the water no longer reflected the blue of the sky as it always had. Instead, it carried a darker hue, neither fully murky nor red. It resembled the color of damp earth freshly turned after heavy rain, mixed with a shade of darkness that was difficult to name. The children were the first to notice. They tossed stones into the canal, watched the ripples spread, and then fell silent in a way that was deeply unsettling. There was no laughter, no playful shouting, as if they sensed something the adults refused to say aloud. By noon, a smell rose from the water, not overpowering, but persistent, like old mud disturbed after lying undisturbed for too long. Fish floated near the surface, drifting weakly, occasionally twitching before sinking again, leaving behind brief ripples like the last traces of breath. The abbot stood by the canal for a long time. He did not chant. He did not sprinkle holy water. He only watched. His gaze grew heavy, like someone who had expected this outcome but could do nothing to stop it. "The land has answered," he said quietly. Not to demand more, but to remember. I stepped closer to the water's edge. By habit, I looked down, searching for my shadow, then remembered. The surface of the canal reflected drifting clouds, trees, and the villagers standing nearby. It reflected everything, except me. That emptiness was so clear it tightened my chest. I knelt and touched the water. It was colder than usual, and when my fingers disturbed the surface, the water darkened slightly more, as if it recognized me. I pulled my hand back. The droplets that fell onto the ground left dark marks that lingered far longer than they should have before drying. That afternoon, the village gathered. There were no arguments, no questions, only small decisions were made. Not to use the canal water for a few days. Not to let children near the banks. Not to pass the temple area at sunset. New unspoken rules settled into place, formed as quietly as the old ones once had. My mother watched me throughout the gathering but said nothing. Only when we returned home did she place her hand on my shoulder. It was warm, real, and yet, I felt an invisible distance between us, as though I stood at the edge of a room she could no longer enter. "Stay a few more days," she said. "Until things settle." I nodded. We both knew that settle did not mean disappear. That night, a light rain fell. Water ran from the roofs, feeding into the darkened canal. Within the steady rhythm of the rain, I heard faint sounds, not voices, but remembrance, the memory of the land, the memory of the water, the memory of shadows that had been held too long. I stood on the porch. Lamplight spilled outward. Trees cast shadows. Fences cast shadows. My mother, standing inside the house, cast a shadow as well. Only I did not. But at the edge of the canal, where lamplight could not reach, a dark shape stood motionless. It did not move closer. It did not reach out. It simply remained there, far enough away to avoid confrontation, close enough to remind us that every exchange leaves something behind. I understood then. The ritual was complete, but its consequences continued to flow. Like the canal, like the land's memory, like my own existence, silent, unmarked, yet undeniable. When the rain stopped and the sky began to clear, the canal's color lightened slightly. Just slightly, enough for the village to believe they could go on living. But I knew. Some colors never vanish. They only withdraw from sight. Chapter 15. The Shadow That Never Disappears. I left Ban Nong Sang on a morning without rain. No one came to see me off. Not because they rejected me, but because no one knew how to look at me anymore. A person without a shadow is not dead, yet no longer fully alive. In this village, those who exist in between have always been more unsettling than ghosts. My mother stood at the front of the house. She did not cry. She only looked at me for a long time, as if trying to carve my shape into her memory. Afraid that one day she might no longer be certain she ever had a child like me. When I bowed to her, her shadow stretched across the red earth, trembling faintly in the morning breeze. Mine did not. Even under the rising sun. Nothing followed my feet. The road out of the village was the same red dirt path as always. Bamboo forests rustled on both sides, sunlight filtering through the leaves in familiar patterns of light and dark. I walked for a long time. Yet I could not hear the sound of my own footsteps. Only the earth beneath me gave no response. When I reached the main road, the world grew louder. Vehicles passed. People moved quickly. Life surged forward. No one noticed me. No one sensed anything strange. And I understood a simple, terrifying truth. Outside Ban Nong Sang, no one looks at another person's shadow. Days passed. I lived like an ordinary person. I ate. I slept. I spoke. I smiled when required. But there were quiet moments, very brief, very still, when I stood alone beneath a street lamp and instinctively looked down. The ground was empty. At first came panic. Then sorrow. Then, finally, familiarity. One night, while I was waiting for a late bus, a small child tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed at me. "Mom," she whispered, "why doesn't that woman have a shadow?" The mother flinched, pulled the child back, and forced a smile. "You're imagining things," she said quickly, dragging her away. I stood there, my heartbeat slowing. So there were still some who could see. That night, I dreamed. There were no rituals, no memories bleeding into mine, only a deep, silent darkness. In that darkness stood a single dark shape. It did not move closer. It did not leave. It did not hate. It did not thank. It simply existed. A voice spoke, not the woman's, not mine, but something far older. "I do not follow you. I only stand where you can no longer stand." I woke in a cold sweat. Outside my window, street lights cast shadows of passing strangers, overlapping, separating, disappearing. I stepped into the light. Nothing appeared beneath me. Yet in that brief moment, I felt the ground tremble faintly, as if something had quietly stepped into the place I had left behind, not to pursue me, but to keep the balance. People say ghosts follow the living. Phi Maya Ngao does not. It does not cling. It does not chase. It does not kill. It simply remains. In the places where humans have taken too much, and never returned what they owed. And if one night, beneath a street lamp, you glance down and notice your shadow arriving half a beat too late, do not panic. Do not turn around. Because it may be that the shadow is only remembering the place where it once stood. People believe that ghosts follow the living. But some things do not follow. They stay behind, holding the place where someone once stood. So if tonight, beneath a street lamp, your shadow lingers just a moment too long, do not panic. Do not turn around. It may only be remembering where it used to belong.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.